Welcome to the Author Roundup. This special segment of the Book Connection show features up-and-coming indie authors who sit down with us and talk about their recently released books. Join us as we chat with our next guest author. Hi everyone, welcome back to Author Roundup. I hope you are well. Today I'm joined by Rory McMahon, a seasoned investigator with over 45 years of experience in both federal law enforcement and private investigations. As a founder of McMahon and Associates Detective Agency in South Florida, he has handled high-profile criminal defense and fraud cases in the U.S. In addition to his fieldwork, he is the author of 3 books on professional investigations, including For Apache, a real story of Ben Kramer. Hi, Rory. How are you today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks. Welcome to the show. So, you've published your latest book at the beginning of this year. Congratulations.
Thank
Can
you.
you tell us a little bit about that book?
Well, I knew that I worked on a lot of high profile cases, and during the course of those investigations, I would talk to my family and friends, and they were always amazed by some of the stories that I told. So I thought it would be something that would be entertaining. And recently, there's been a lot of both books, documentaries, and movies around some of the people that I've been involved with. And I figured my side of the murder of Don Aronell has never been told. And the definitive book about the murder was written by a guy named Tom Burdick, who wrote Thunderbolt. Anyway, so my involvement in that book and talking to him led to my being fired from my job as a probation officer. And my side of the story has never come out. So basically the reason was twofold. Number one, I thought it was an entertaining story. And number two, I wanted to get my side of the events, in the record.
Okay, gotcha. So, this is kind of like a memoir, but also speaking about these high profile cases concerning
Correct. Which is part
criminal.
and parcel of my work, both as a federal probation officer and also as a legal investigator for the last 35 years.
Okay, so the inspiration was to just tell your side of the story.
And to hopefully entertain people, in particular, my kids and grandkids, I won't be around to tell them this story. So, they'll have the opportunity to read it for themselves. I convinced my dad several years before his death. He was a judge in New York State, and he also had some very interesting stories. So I convinced him to self-publish, his thoughts and his career. And following my research and selling this book, I plan on writing a book about my grandfather and my uncle, both named Joseph McGuire, and he was born in Northern Ireland. And I just, for his family's sake, for my family's sake, just to have that information out there, that's a main objective of mine going forward.
Yeah, of course. You want to leave, your legacy behind and all your accomplishments and written down is, always
Right.
important.
And both my grandfather and my uncle had a very illustrious life. So also, I think it will be a compelling read.
Yeah, yeah. So, what is the span of your book as far as years and stories compiled together?
Well, I mean, it starts with me being born and introducing my family members, but the events that are described basically start in 1973 when I became a county probation officer in New York, and then right up till to now.
Okay, perfect. And so, you've worked as both a federal probation officer and a private investigator. What was the biggest adjustment you had to make when transitioning between both of those roles?
That's a very easy question. Working for the government, you get paid, every 2 weeks, whether you earn your paycheck or not.
Yeah.
I had never been involved in a situation where I was my own boss
Yeah.
and where I had to, run a business and market a business. I felt comfortable that I could, be a very good investigator, but owning your own business is a whole new world that took a long time to get used to.
Yeah. And so you had many different titles and roles, but what drew you to the world of investigations? And was there a defining moment that set the path for you?
Well, first of all, in 1972, when I graduated from college, I was an English major, and I thought I was going to be a high school English teacher. And
Really?
I came out and did not. I couldn't find a job because the Vietnam War was going on, and people that were in the teaching profession could get a deferment based on if they were teachers. So I had no interest in that. I had the number. I had already opted out, of being considered for the draft. They never reached the number that I was at, so I didn't have to worry about that. And my dad, who's been, career civil servant, said he knew somebody that worked in the Westchester County Probation Department, and that he possibly could get me a job there. And I remember telling him I didn't even know what a probation officer was. That didn't come
Mhm.
up in my English studies at college. So, I went in for the interview, and, we hit it off, and it was something that I really liked. But, I had a caseload of over 100. And yeah, I mean, you just can't do anything meaningful with 100. So
Yeah.
I worked a case with a federal probation officer who was also supervising one of the people that I had, and I got to know him pretty well, and he recommended that I apply for a job in federal probation. And, their caseloads were like 35. So I knew that I could, basically, do something positive with them. And
Mhm.
even though it was having to commute into New York City every day, it ultimately be worth it both in terms of gratification and also money wise. So I
Mhm.
did. And then in 1982, I transferred down to Florida, and then the real fun began because those cases were unbelievable. And I thought that growing up in New York, that I had pretty much seen everything, and nothing prepared me for what I saw when I arrived in South Florida.
Yeah. And South Florida specifically, is it Miami that you were based out of for most of your career?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
Miami and then Fort Lauderdale. Yeah.
Okay. So in the as far as like Miami is concerned in the, era of like drug smuggling and organized crime, Miami was probably pretty chaotic.
I mean, the main TV show at the time was Miami Vice.
Yeah,
I mean, I was living
there you
what they
go.
were doing from week to
Yeah.
week.
Yeah. So what was it like being on like the front lines during that time?
It was exciting,
Yeah.
um, and I had a unique opportunity. We had a new boss who created this new unit, which was basically supervising career offenders. So, I mean, that was something that was right up my alley. Being from New York, I was, always interested in the mob,
Mhm.
but this was like the mob, fraud, and drugs. So those were the three specialties that I had. So, I mean, it was just an exciting time. And then
Yeah.
basically, once I left there, you know, other than being a teacher, I didn't really have any skills. I mean, they had trained me to be an investigator, so I felt that I could do that. And then coincidentally, a friend of mine was teaching classes of training people how to be private investigators, and I had been a guest
Mhm.
speaker at his class on several occasions. So I went to him to get, the lay of the land on what investigators do and whatnot. And just coincidentally, they were expanding the program that he was teaching. He was teaching it from 6 to 10 at night, but they wanted to do it from 1 to 5 in the afternoon. And he asked me if I'd be interested. I said, I mean, I always wanted to be a teacher, so yes, I'd be interested. But I'm not real sure, other than backgrounds and criminal investigations and stuff that I did. I'm not
Mhm.
sure about these other things, insurance investigation, domestic investigation. So it kind of worked out perfectly. It trained me, in the aspects of the job that I didn't know. And it also
Mhm.
provided me an office that I could set up my own agency and then
Mhm.
intern my best students. So, I mean,
Mhm.
it worked out really well.
Yeah. And so how long were you a private investigator?
I have been a private investigator for 35 years. I started in
Okay.
1991. I opened my agency. I started as an
Okay.
investigator in 1990.
Okay. And so what would you say would be the most important skill as a or that a great investigator needs?
There's basically three skills that you need to have. I mean, we are in the information business. So the three ways of getting information are, you know, to do, searches, Google searches now. Back, in those days, you had to go down to the courthouse or the recorder's office, and then you could get information about people, their homes and, liens and judgments and, all that good stuff. The second way to get information about people is to interview people that know the target of your investigation, or even the target himself, if you feel that, there's a good reason or have reason to believe that, maybe you can convince him to tell, his side of the story. I mean, you're doing the investigation on him, whether he cooperates or not. So why not have, his involvement and tell you what he believes. I mean, I used to do that in criminal cases, doing pre-sentence reports. We would have the defendant come in and, you know, usually it was his lawyer would want to write a statement, not give it to me so that he could control the narrative.
Mhm,
So, that was something that I was very familiar with. So, and the third way is surveillance. You can find out so much more about a person by watching them, by
mm,
seeing where they go to work, who they hang out with, what kind of activities they're involved in, and then identifying and speaking to people, around them as well. Once you become aware of, who knows him and, check their background and, see if you might be able to get some information. So it's
mhm.
basically just finding as much information about the person as you can using those three skills.
And how long did a case on average last?
I've had cases that have gone for years,
Really?
and I have cases. Most cases I work are done in a week. Some of them in a couple of days. A background investigation, because of the availability of information online, and court records and municipal records are becoming a lot more available.
Mhm,
So we don't have to gumshoe it, as they say. We don't have to go to these places. We can go online. I prefer to do interviews in person as opposed to Zoom or over the phone, because it's very important that you be able to watch the body language of the person. So to
mhm,
see, if there's any sign of deception, because you may be recommending to your attorney client that this person has valuable information and, they should testify, and if need be, subpoenaed to testify, but you don't want them to get up there and tell a totally different story than
yeah,
what you told me. Um,
yeah.
and they just may not come across as very credible.
What advice would you give to aspiring investigators, I guess, who want to follow in your footsteps? What would you say to someone that wants to be an investigator?
Basically, an intense curiosity
Yeah.
and perseverance. But for 35 years, I've been getting calls from people that tell me they think that they have the ability to be a good investigator. And I certainly encourage that. I mean, this is the best job I've ever had. And I
Mhm,
can't even imagine doing something that I would find more interesting and compelling. I mean, literally, I got a call at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night by an associate who was also a former client. And he told me that he needed me to get on an airplane from Miami the next morning and fly to the Bahamas. And from there to get on a cruise ship that was going to be docked there, because I was going to be watching a person that stole $3 million from his client company. And he
oh,
literally was, providing cooperation and information on a Friday. And at three
uh-huh.
o'clock, he asked to take a break so that he could go out and clear his head. And he literally got on a plane to Miami and got on board the ship. So I went where the boat was parked, and I'm like, how am I going to do this? So because they weren't accepting any. So I came up with the brilliant idea that I'll talk to the person that's in charge of security on the boat,
Mhm.
so ship, whatever. And so I talked to that person, a really nice guy, and he said, Rory, under any other circumstance, this this would be a no brainer. I would, put you on the ship and let you do whatever you're going to do. But
Mm.
two problems. Number one, I don't have any space. I don't even have a broom closet. And you don't really need to do it because this ship is only going to small islands that are owned by the company. So
Mm.
if you're worried that he's going to get off, and then, travel to someplace where he couldn't be extradited, that type of stuff, that's not going to happen. But what I will do for you is I'll give you my number. You can call me every day and I'll make it my mission to make sure when he leaves the boat that he gets back on the boat. The other problem is he's not by himself. He's with his wife and three kids.
Oh
So this
God.
is not a guy. First of all,
Yeah.
I think I speculated that he had this trip planned. And, aside from having to tell his wife that, he's been, scamming people for years, that, they're not going to take this trip. Yeah, it was in April. It might have been spring break. I don't know what. But so a week after, the trip, they came back in. I had a team of surveillance people because we were going to follow him from there and see where he went. So
Mm.
we're all in position. I'm watching the people coming off the boat. So, and of course, he waited till the very end. And I see a guy, a woman, and three kids that were as orange as orange can be. They obviously were very fair skinned and no suntan. It was basically
Yeah.
a sunburn.
Uh-huh.
So, and then I watched him leave the ship and then go a little further and get back on the ship. So I'm like,
Mm.
oh my God, call up my now friend that I'm talking to a lot. And I said, they just got back on the ship. And he goes, hold on, let me double check this. So he goes, yep. So last time they went on the East Caribbean tour. This week
Uh-huh.
they're going on the West Caribbean tour. And again, same conditions apply. Just going to
Mhm.
private islands, 90% of the time they're going to be on the ship. So same thing. I mean, by this point, my client was a little disturbed that this
Yeah.
is going to carry
I
on for
bet.
another week, but he understood. And I didn't have to bother. He knew my number. Check in with him periodically, and then when at the end of the second week, team's back in place. We follow him from the port to the Hard Rock Hotel, no, Hard Rock restaurant that was in Bayview in downtown Miami. So at that point, I broke off, but some of my guys watched him, and they followed him basically to the airport, and he flew back to Philadelphia, which is where he started. But one of the story being, I could wake up in Fort Lauderdale and that night be in who
Somewhere
knows,
else.
Largo. I could be up in New York. I could be in
Yeah.
Atlanta. I could be anywhere, and usually they were very interesting cases. And at the end of the day, I'm just trying to help people out. People
Yeah.
have a problem, and I'm trying to help them find a solution.
Yeah. So your line of work is very unconventional as far as like hours, worked and things like that. Did
Right.
you ever at one point like miss or want that like sort of 9 to 5 job where it's like you just turn your mind off and you relax, or do you no?
Never.
Never?
And what I certainly didn't miss was working for people who didn't know how to do the job that were
Yeah.
telling me, who I
Yeah.
thought
How
knew
to
how
do
to
it.
do the job, how to do the job.
Yeah.
So, if I'm going to work for an idiot, it may as well be me as opposed to somebody,
Right.
that doesn't know what they're doing.
Yeah, yeah. And so shifting into another theme in your book you highlight some gray areas between law enforcement and crime. How did you navigate both of those moral complexities in your career?
Well, first of all, being an investigator for, the majority of my adult life, I came to see things that I never expected that I would see. And particularly in Miami, when I came down here in 1982, the corruption was rampant. But you can almost see why it happens. I mean, a lot of people live on the water; they have boats. So some drug dealer, and they were very easy to identify. There's the 19-year-old kid with a Coke spoon around his neck, necklace, and he's driving, a Maserati, and he's got, a 32-foot yacht. Well, unless his daddy is a multimillionaire. That's not the real world. So, I mean, the scenario could be as easy as, hey, Rory, I see that you have a nice, 32-foot, runaround, parked at the, I'll pay you $100,000 to use it for the night. So, I mean, it takes a person with real fortitude, to
Yeah.
turn that down. And I mean, they corrupted police, they corrupted judges, they corrupted banks. I mean, they would walk into banks with, suitcases or boxes filled with cash and then,
Mhm.
get them to, not report them.
Yeah.
So it was, and I've worked on cases involving all of those types of activities.
Wow. And so, what about today? Do you think after all of your decades worth of experience, seeing all like these flaws in the justice system, what have you
To
seen today that has changed or has it?
total flaws in the, I call it the injustice system. And I
Mm,
have seen it on every level. I've seen it in family court, I've seen it in civil court, and most particularly in criminal court. I mean, it's appalling, what's going on or not going on. I mean,
mhm.
I was involved in a lawsuit that took 3 years. I mean, people are going to the courts for a remedy. They think that they're going to get a remedy, in 6 months, not 3 years. So
Mhm.
the system is not helping them. And there definitely is a system for the rich and a system for the
Mhm.
poor. And I mean, it's never best exemplified than what's going on in today's world.
And so you mentioned some high profile cases, and there's many in your book. You've encountered infamous figures like Ben Kramer and Barry Seal. What about those experiences stuck out to you and those criminals specifically that are in your book?
Well, Kramer was an example of somebody that benefited from being very wealthy because of his drug dealing. And as I point out in the book, every time he came to my office, he was accompanied by an attorney, a defense attorney.
Mhm.
So you can imagine that's not going to lead to the free flow of information about his, activities.
Right.
Fortunately for me, I had, police officers and agents that were watching him that were telling me what's really going on. But I mean,
Mhm.
just the fact that he could do that, no other person in my 17 years working in probation, never once was anyone allowed to bring, anybody other than somebody that might have some information that would answer questions that I had raised. So, it had a chilling effect. I believe I had enough evidence to violate his parole, and his attorneys, and he also had, senators that were writing on his behalf and everything. And
Mhm.
as I say in the book, 3 times I requested a warrant for him, all with documented information, and they kept denying it. And shortly after he was off parole, he was arrested and charged with, drug smuggling and
Mhm.
getting millions of dollars, which financed his activities as a powerboat racer. So when he was traveling all over the globe against my recommendation, but the parole commission was granting them again because they're getting letters, they're getting threats from lawyers that they're gonna. So I mean, it just wasn't right. And
Yeah.
Seal gamed the system. I mean, he was sentenced to 10 years in jail. I wrote the report that recommended 10 years in jail. He was sentenced
Yeah.
by the closest thing to that we had to, the old West Judge Roy Bean. And after he, served a couple of years, he started cooperating with the DEA, and
Mhm.
then they moved to have his sentence commuted to probation, and at the same time put him in the witness protection program. And right after, well, I was in the court when the resentencing occurred, and the DEA agent who was telling this great tale, the great activities performed for DEA by SEAL, and he was the same DEA agent who across the hall in front of another judge said, "Judge, this guy has to get a break because he's the greatest informant in the history of the DEA." I'm like,
Mhm.
am I? Is this deja vu? I'm like, these are
Yeah.
people that are in 1 week with he moved up to number one in the. So you know
That's crazy.
Judge Rutger, is a law and order guy. If the DEA agent says, so him and his lawyer come into a room where I'm reading the conditions of probation, and I'm also the witness protection officer. So I asked him, I went over the conditions, and he said, no, he goes, I'm moving to New York. I'm like, you're not deciding where you're moving. You're moving where the U.S. Marshals determine is safe for you to live. And then so he goes, I'm not doing that. I'm like, and what about the contract that the Colombians have on you? Well, I'll have an army of armed guards. No, you won't. Yeah, you'll have an army of more. There'll be U.S. Marshals. Oh no, I'll hire. I'm like, I looked at his lawyer, who I've known for many years. I said, I'm going out to have a cigarette. When I come back, your client's either going to adopt a cooperative attitude or we're all marching back in and seeing Judge Rutger. And I'm telling him, this person is not amenable to probation supervision. So I came back 5 minutes later and he was a quiet little puppy. And then the next day he opted out of the program and went back to Louisiana, which is where he was from, and where the hitmen would have started their search. And then ultimately, what happened. So again, sheer stupidity, arrogance. I mean, he was an arrogant jerk, and in my opinion, he got what he deserved because
Yeah.
he was hated by law enforcement because he would flaunt it. I'm the world's greatest drug dealer, and there's nothing you can do about it. I understand why it was a compelling movie, especially starring, Tom Cruise. But again, even they didn't even get the story right. They didn't even
Yeah.
mention the reason he was in jail was because of an arrest for Quaaludes in Miami. They
Yeah.
didn't mention that.
Yeah. So how did it feel writing your story and about these criminal cases? When did you know that you wanted to publish and share your story? When did you begin writing this book?
I started writing it in January or December of 2023, going into 2024.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, and in January of 2023, I had cancer surgery. So I was focusing more on my life and my legacy and whatnot.
Yeah.
So, and I started writing a book years before, and the name of the book was going to be Injustice for All. So,
Mhm.
I felt a compelling, and as I say, then the Tom Cruise movie came out, the documentaries, surrounding Ben Kramer, movies. So the timing was right. So, and
Yeah.
I'd be very interested in seeing this become a documentary or
Yeah.
a streaming movie, anything like that. But more
Yeah.
important is just the, getting my side of the story out there for the record and having something that, you know, my family and friends and, the reviews that I've received, basically, my brother-in-law, he said, he goes, I knew most of this stuff. I had no idea the extent of, your involvement and the other ramifications, of
Mhm.
what the story is about.
Oh, wow. And so how long did it take you to
It
complete
took
your
me a
book?
year.
A year?
Yeah. I mean, I did my final draft in December, early December of last year.
Yeah. Okay. And how is this book different from other publications that you've published?
Basically, those were focused on my teaching, people how to become investigators. I had done some classroom work and I developed a program. But there's other than the college that I taught at, which offered an associate degree with a major in private investigation, there are no colleges in this country that offer that. I mean, I was enrolled in LIU in New York when I was working in county probation to get a master in criminal justice. And there is no more worthless program than the criminal justice program. And the reason I say that is, and I didn't finish it, I got 21 credits out of 36, but they don't teach you any of the three skills you need to be an investigator. They teach you a lot of psychology and sociology around, the criminal, mastermind or the
Yeah.
mindset of the criminals, but they don't help you get a job. They help you if you're in the job to get promoted. I mean, people
Yeah.
could be that would be considered, favorable if you were a sergeant looking to move up to lieutenant or captain or whatever. But
Yeah.
they don't, it's a very narrowly focused program, more narrowly focused than any other program, in existence. I mean, I came from English, which I could do anything with, and I proved it. I became a probation officer, which has nothing to do with
Crazy.
reading or writing or studying Shakespeare.
Yeah. And so do you still teach online courses at all? Like, are you
I
still
do.
teaching anything?
I don't teach them myself. And as I say in the book, I may be Irish. I may have been born on 7/11, but if it weren't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. So two community colleges in New Jersey, Bergen and Brookdale community colleges, wanted to teach my program in their schools. And
Wow.
I have close friends up in New Jersey coming from New York, and I had a faculty lined up that was, unbelievable. So that all happened in late 2019, and you can
Mhm.
guess what the results were in 2020 when they're trying to, recruit for the
Oh,
classes.
man. Yeah.
Happened.
Oh,
Now,
no.
and now it's 2020, and I'm not working a lot because nobody is, or you're confined to your house. It was the first
Yeah.
time I'd ever used Zoom to do an interview. But so I said, a friend of mine was the national director of the National Association of Legal Investigators. And he called me to work on an online project. And it was something that was going to be, very complex and take up a lot of time. I said, I'll do it if two other people will join me. They initially said yes. A couple of weeks later, they said no, too much work. So I said to my friend John, I said, I'm not doing this by myself. And, it's too hard. But what I will do is I'll take my, you know, classroom program and put it online. And he was very familiar with it. He introduced me to a college up in Worcester, Mass, where he lived, to try and convince them to get it. And like everywhere else, they love the idea, but I don't know where it goes from there. So and then so he said, yeah, that's fine with him. I would have to make a presentation to the NALI board. So I did. They approved it. And so, that's out there still, available online. And it's
Okay.
not just 10 courses that can be used for CEUs. It's also 10 courses that can be, part of a certificate program, which will give them the skills that they need and the information they need so that they could, apply for a job and get a job as an investigator. And private investigator is just one small portion of the investigative jobs out there. So basically it's a career path. But,
Yeah.
you know, the marketing and promotion, two of my not so strong points. I thought the investigative community would support it, and they haven't.
Yeah.
So it's not doing as well as I would have
Oh.
hoped.
Well, what was your so as an English major, you obviously wrote a lot of papers, so you've written a lot and you finally, you published a book. Had you always enjoyed writing as, an English major, or was that something that you liked
I
doing
wouldn't say
later?
always, but the older I got, the more I enjoyed reading and the more
Okay.
I enjoyed writing. But and working for the government, there's no shortage of writing assignments.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to document everything you do. And basically I treated the book as an investigation. So in the investigative world, you start with everything that you can find, and
Mhm.
then you whittle it down to the important information. And that's exactly what I did. I mean,
Yeah.
I have boxes of information, newspaper clippings, articles, videos. So, and I just, what needs to be in the story and what's not. And, I didn't want to be, I'm not a detail oriented type of person that's going to be describing the surroundings and everything.
Yeah.
As a surveillance guy, I've learned we just want the meat of the matter. My boss, the insurance guy, claims guy, said, Rory, I know you don't do the surveillance, but your guys don't understand. When I look at your video, I want to see the claimant, in the middle of the screen, hopefully doing something that he's told us that he can't do, like play golf. So,
Oh.
that I've thought about that often. So, if it's not, about the person I'm writing about or somebody in his periphery, it's extraneous, unless
Yeah.
you're trying to make a point somehow. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the book, a friend of mine was working on it with me, and he goes, "Chapter two, you're talking about your family and everything." I go, "I don't know if you've ever noticed in movies, you start with where it happened, then you introduce the characters, and then
Yeah.
you introduce the plot and what." Oh,
Yeah.
that's what I did. And,
Yeah.
in my mind, it's very simple, but, somebody that, I mean, he's from a banking background, it's not so simple to him.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you find a part of your writing experience difficult? Was the writing process difficult for you at all?
It was difficult culling down all of this information I had, most of it seemingly important that I saved it, um,
Yeah.
but not really moving. You have to have. It's like my cases. The first thing I do is sit down with the client and find out, what it is with the problem, and what
Mhm.
is the solution in your mind. So,
Mhm.
same thing with the book. What do I want to accomplish at the end of the book? And we've talked
Right.
about that. And then it's just a matter of going through all of the information that I have and, throwing out the bad stuff, you know, hopefully putting the good stuff in a compelling way, and then,
Yeah.
going from there.
Yeah. Do you have a particular part of your book that was most interesting to write or a section of your book that you're most proud of?
Absolutely. That would be chapter two, which is
Okay.
which is my family and my career in probation. And
Mhm.
then chapter nine, which is my start of my legal career, legal investigative career. And then chapter 10, which is very short, which is lessons learned. So, I start with, being born and I end with where I am today.
Yeah. And so your dad was kind of the one that introduced you to someone, that started you in the probation.
Right.
Do you think that what did he think about you going to school, for English and then coming out, starting your own agency as a private investigator?
Well, he was a very tough guy.
Mhm.
And we would never even get into that conversation. He was born in 1920. So he was a product of the Depression. And in his
Mhm.
mind, when times are tough, it's best to have a government job because they always need people, regardless of the economic circumstances. And it's a good job to have. Like I said, you get paid every 2 weeks, whether you earned it or not.
Yeah.
So, but I noticed a dramatic change when I was fired by the probation office. And I mean, he was a judge, so he knows the system and he knows I was hosed. And I
Mm.
actually had my brother, who's an attorney up in New York, a mob attorney, came down and represented me. The other person I had representing me was the head of the PBA for the state of Florida.
Mhm.
And he read the stuff and he goes, "You got to be kidding me. I'll have you reinstated in 5 minutes." I go,
Oh gosh.
"Al, have you ever worked a case in federal court before?" "Oh, no." I go, "They run things a little differently over here. I don't think that that's going to happen," because they decided they had enough of me. And at that point in time, I pretty much had enough of them. So,
Yeah.
as much as it hurt at the times, especially since I had a 3-month-old son, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And my mother
Yeah.
used to say, "Rory, everything happens for a reason." So I couldn't figure out the reason at the
Oh,
time, but looking back, she was right, as always.
yeah. Oh, wow. So your book was published this year, recently. What was the nicest feedback or review you've received about your book?
This is so unbelievable. I got to read it to you. In order to identify an injustice, one must first understand and know what justice is. Rory McMahon spent a career enforcing the law and equally preventing its corruption. Rory
Mhm.
perfectly harvests firsthand experience as both a federal agent and subsequently a nationally respected criminal defense investigator. Rory provides incredible insights into heinous behavior and tragic immoral abuse of power. The book intensely illustrates a world which some can imagine but very few ever encounter. Television and movies do not compare, and throughout this book,
Mm.
Rory's depiction of life imitating art keeps the reader spellbound.
Wow. That's amazing. What
I
did
mean, I
you
mean, first of all, I would have never suspected that this guy was, would say something like that. I knew, I know the guy for 30 years, so I knew it
Oh,
wasn't
yeah,
going to be
yeah.
bad. But I was speechless. I had to read it 3 times. I'm like, I can't believe this.
Wow. Wow, yeah, that's crazy. That was really nice. So have you had more feedback like that or
Yes, yeah,
yeah, that's
yeah.
great.
I
Oh,
mean, again, just blew me away. I didn't know these people had
yeah,
those thoughts or those feelings, and it's kind of nice to be vindicated.
yeah,
It's not me. It's not me just that thinks that this book is okay.
yeah.
A lot of my friends and people that don't even know me, were very impressed by it.
Yeah, so did a lot of people, did your family, friends, and colleagues know that you were publishing this type of specific book while you were writing it?
No, no,
No.
I didn't. I mean, my family knew I was writing it, but I
Yeah.
didn't tell anybody that it came out. I was shocked the day it came out because they were telling me it was going to come out in February, and it came out January 27th. I got a call from a publishing company, and they go, I just read your book." I'm like, "You what? How did you do that?" "Well, because it's out." I'm like, "When did it
I
come out?"
didn't know
It
yet.
came out, today. So I'm like, as soon as I hung up the phone, I was like, yeah, it just, it was shocking that it was out, and yeah, I wasn't ready. And so, so now I've been trying to play catch up
Yeah.
and the lag between the time the book is out and the book is printed. I mean, I didn't get copies of the book until like 3 weeks later. So
Oh,
I
wow.
can't go out and promote something that I don't have a copy of.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah.
that's where I'm at.
Yeah.
Now I do have some copies, but I'm waiting for, the my share of the printed copies to be sent to me.
Yeah. So as an author, do you have any advice for a writer working on his or her first book?
I will tell you what a lawyer, actually the lawyer that represented Phil Wilson, who was one of my main characters and a guy that I knew about. I mean, he was infamous, and I knew about him when I was a federal officer in New York. And then I
Mhm.
actually ended up supervising him, and his lawyer was an attorney by the name of Paul Lazarus. And I asked him to review the galleys and see if there was anything that he wanted to add in terms of, my what I wrote about Phil Wilson. And
Mhm.
I got a call several weeks later, and he said, I am totally blown away by this book. I'm like, this is an incredible, incredible book. And I said, and he goes, I've always felt like I had a story to tell. And, he's like me, he's getting up there in age, he's retired. And I
Mhm.
said, Paul, do yourself a favor, do your family a favor, do your kids and your grandkids a favor, do it.
Mhm.
I don't care if you sell one copy, just that, first of all, it's a very, you're looking inward and spending a lot more time doing it than you ever have in your life. So,
Mhm.
and things will come to you that you haven't thought about for years.
Yeah.
So, not only is it cathartic, but at the end of the day, it's going to be something that's worthwhile for your family and your friends.
Yeah.
So,
Definitely a
do it.
huge
Do it.
accomplishment. Yeah, do it, publish it. And at least, once you do it, you can get your mind off of, "Okay, well, I should do it, I shouldn't do it." You did it, so that's, like,
Right.
a huge thing. And yeah, like you said, you can leave it for your family and
The narrowing down the information that's not necessary took a lot longer than I thought it would.
I know, I'm sure not fun at times. Wow, okay. Well, what personal or professional, I mean, like, book goals do you have this year planned out?
I continue to work, but ready to pull the plug on being an investigator. I'll never
Mm.
give it up 100%, but I want,
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time working on criminal defense investigations, which are very time consuming and last for a long time. So I've done some interesting work, gotten some good results on some of those cases, and that's very fulfilling. I mean, anytime you can help people out, and especially people that are, facing jail, that's very rewarding.
All right. Well, I just have one more question for you about your book. And that is, if you have one message you want readers to take away from your book, what would that be?
The message would be life is not easy. I mean, every semester when I started class with new students, I would write that on the board. Rule number one, life is not fair. And then the second rule was, if you have any questions about that, go back to rule number one. And I would tell them, oh, this is not fair. Yeah, well, welcome to the real world. Life is not fair all the time. It's not even
Right.
fair most of the time. So, that's a reality that we all have to accept. And I've had a very difficult time with that my entire life. One of my friends in federal probation in New York said to me, Rory, I love you like a brother, but you're not Don Quixote. You can't knock down all the windmills that you encounter. What I suggest is that you think of yourself as the Lone Ranger. You have six silver bullets. When you take up the cause, make sure it's the right one that you want to expend one of those six bullets on. And, you know, he was right. Do I follow his advice 100% of the time? No. Do I follow it 75% of the time? No. I definitely follow it 50% of the time. And at least that's half the battle. But I get sucked in by people's story, and particularly when it
Yeah.
involves them being screwed over by the system,
Yeah.
by their employers, by their friends, and I like to try and help them resolve the problem.
Yeah. Well, Rory, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing your story. I appreciate your time so much.
Thank you for having me.
And if you're interested in picking up Rory McMahon's book, head to authorhouse.com or you can find it on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. As always, thank you so much for listening and tuning in today. And I will see you for our next interview.